On a frosty winter dawn in a tranquil Colorado settlement, a solitary gunshot fractured the stillness, and along with it, something far more profound. An agriculturist, aged 65, discharged his weapon, asserting he perceived danger close to his animals. But once the haze dissipated, no feral creature was found in the snow. It was an injured German shepherd. His emaciated frame showed, his eyes conveyed suffering, and his history was an enigma. The reasons for his presence and his ownership were unknown, and why, having been abandoned to perish, did he reappear not seeking retribution but to safeguard the very individuals who had forsaken him? The ensuing events would reveal long-concealed truths, bring together unfamiliar individuals, and demonstrate that even the most fractured spirits can heal an entire community. This narrative explores fidelity, atonement, and the transformative connection that can exist between people and canines. The day began as any typical morning in the tranquil slopes of Emerson Valley, a close-knit community where familiarity was universal and transformation occurred more gradually than the changing of seasons. Daylight had yet to extend across the frozen meadows when a solitary firearm report pierced the quiet. It was neither a cautionary discharge nor an unintentional firing, but a deliberate squeeze of the trigger by Earl Whitaker, an agriculturist of 65 years, a figure shaped by the very depleted land he had cultivated his entire existence. Brusque, solitary, and laden with unspoken, long-held resentment. He reported observing something near his animals, a swift movement, and without hesitation he took aim and shot. The form he discovered prone in the frigid grass posed no danger. It was not a coyote, nor a wolf, nor anything that could rationalize his action. It was a German shepherd, emaciated, hemorrhaging, yet still alive. The canine wore no collar and bore no identification, only its ribs protruding through soiled fur and eyes with an unsettlingly human quality that Earl could not meet for an extended period. However, rather than rendering aid, he grumbled something inaudibly, turned his back, and abandoned the dog in a heap near the barn wall, akin to refuse. News spreads rapidly in communities such as Emerson Valley, swifter than vehicles on unpaved roads. By midday, hushed conversations permeated the town. He had shot a canine. He had not even ascertained its ownership. He had abandoned it to perish. Yet, no action was taken. Not by the sheriff, not by a veterinarian, not by any neighbor. The quiet that followed was more deafening than the firearms report. And perhaps that was the most deplorable aspect, save for one individual. Mia Jensen had witnessed the entire event from the orchard boundary adjacent to the property. A 14-year-old possessing more compassion than many adult men in the community. She remained immobilized as the sound of the shot resonated within her. She observed the dog collapse and saw Earl depart as if he had merely crushed an insect. And for the remainder of that day, Mia was unable to dispel the vision seared into her memory. Those silent, imploring eyes met with no response. Earl asserted that he believed it to be a feral animal. He stated he was safeguarding his property. However, this transcended mere property concerns. It concerned something more profound, a community too fearful to voice dissent, a man too damaged to experience emotion, and a canine that had not surrendered even when the world had forsaken it initially. And such is the nature of small communities. Occasionally, the most significant narratives commence in quietude. At times, the instant a projectile exits a firearm, everything is altered, not solely for the one struck, but for all observers. On that particular morning, something fractured within Emerson Valley. It was not merely the frost in the earth, it was the unarticulated conventions individuals had adhered to for years. And a single young woman was poised to defy them all. What Mia resolved to do next would not only preserve a life but also stir the very core of the entire town. Mia Jensen found herself unable to eat that night, incapable of speaking, and powerless to dismiss the image of the dog's form, still crumpled, almost consumed by frost near the barn. The sound of the gunshot reverberated in her mind like a persistent, echoing bell. Her parents attempted to divert her attention. Her younger brother, Ben, inquired if she wished to play cards, but Mia remained seated at the kitchen table, her jaw set and her hands clenched into fists. Something within her had altered, and it was irreversible. The following morning, with the air so crisp it felt sharp, Mia donned her coat, packed bandages and a water bottle into her rucksack, and quietly wheeled her bicycle past the front porch. No one observed her departure, even the sunrise had not yet made its appearance. The orchard path she traversed was a mixture of frozen mud and treacherous roots, but she paid it no mind. Her sneakers lost purchase, her breath formed vapor in the air. She pressed onward. Upon reaching the barn, her heart sank. He was still there. The dog was barely clinging to life, his breathing shallow, his body curled tightly as if attempting to vanish. Snow had encrusted his fur. One leg was unnaturally twisted beneath him and the blood on his shoulder had congealed into a dark, frozen patch. Mia fell to her knees, blinking back tears that stung in the wind. Unsure what to say, she uttered what her brother used to tell their old Labrador during bad dreams, "I've got you, okay? You're not alone." With unsteady hands, she removed her scarf and pressed it against the wound. The dog flinched but emitted no growl. His eyes opened slightly dark, bewildered, searching. In that fleeting moment, barely a second, something unvoiced passed between them, an understanding, a silent accord. Mia seized the handle of an old wooden sled near the fence. It was intended for the apple harvest, not for transporting injured dogs through frostbitten conditions, but she dragged it over nonetheless, lifted him with all her might, and commenced the slow, silent journey back through the orchard. Her fingers grew numb, her legs ached, and the sled collided with every root and rock. She did not pause. By the time she arrived at the tool shed behind her house, her jeans were soaked and her throat felt raw. She enveloped the dog in 2 feed sacks and a wool blanket, tucked him behind a stack of crates, and whispered stories to him in the darkness. She told him about Caleb, her older brother, who had passed away 2 years prior. Caleb had always adored dogs and had dreamed of opening a rescue. Mia informed Shadow, for that is what she named him, Shadow, that he was safe now, that Caleb would never have abandoned him there. Hours elapsed before her mother discovered her. She did not shout, nor did she pose questions. She looked at her daughter, then at the dog, then at the way Mia's arms were protectively curled around him as if trying to hold together something unseen and delicate. Her mother said nothing, simply walked back into the house with tears forming in her eyes. However, not everyone was supportive. Her father was irate when he learned of the situation. "You can't just keep a dying dog in our shed, Mia. It's not safe. What if it has rabies? What if it dies in there?" But Mia stood her ground. For the first time in months, she did not falter in her speech. She did not yield. "I'm not letting him die alone." And somehow that declaration ended the argument abruptly. That night, Shadow whimpered once in his sleep. Mia sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his back. The dog was feverish, still bleeding, still battling. But for the first time since the shot, he was not alone in the cold. And that was a beginning. The repercussions of Mia's actions soon rippled through Emerson Valley, for in such towns, secrets are fleeting and second chances are not universally embraced. It did not take long for Mia's quiet act of compassion, transporting a grievously injured German shepherd into her family's tool shed, to spread through town gossip like a wildfire through arid grass. At the general store, over steaming cups of overbrewed coffee, the regulars had already formed their opinions. "It's merely a stray," some conjectured. "Could be hazardous," others opined, shaking their heads, their eyes glinting with something akin to shame. "That man just shot it and walked away," one woman remarked softly. "And now we're feigning that it's acceptable." But the man at the epicenter of the turmoil, Earl Whitaker, remained silent. He ceased his visits to town entirely, remaining secluded on his property, attending to his duties as if the seasons had not shifted. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was something more profound, a guilt he did not know how to bear. Mia's father, meanwhile, found himself caught in a moral quandary. He did not want the dog there, did not trust it, and did not wish for his family to become entangled in something that hinted at trouble. Yet, every time he observed Mia sitting quietly beside the dog in the shed, reading from Caleb's old books, he could not bring himself to remove Shadow. Perhaps it was the way she looked at the animal, as if she perceived something in that dog that the rest of the world declined to acknowledge. Shadow, for his part, was not making recovery a simple task. He abstained from food for the initial 2 days, turned his head away when water was presented, and flinched at every creak of the shed door, every gust of wind. Mia's mother called upon an old mentor, a retired veterinarian named Dr. Selma, who had long ago exchanged her stethoscope for gardening implements. Dr. Selma took one look at Shadow and declared, "This dog has endured a war, but he's still here. That signifies something." With borrowed antibiotics, donated gauze, and Mia's unwavering patience, Shadow gradually began to blink more frequently, to twitch his ears, and to breathe more deeply. But just as optimism started to emerge like spring vegetation, it was abruptly extinguished. It occurred on the 3rd night. A thunderstorm descended like a locomotive, bringing sheets of rain and flashes of lightning that cleaved the sky. Mia hurried to the tool shed with a flashlight and additional blankets. But the shed was vacant. The door was ajar, and Shadow was gone, vanished without a trace. Panic ensued. Mia searched the fields with a flashlight until her voice grew hoarse from calling his name. She left bowls of food at the shed door. Her father paced the porch, muttering about how wild animals revert to their natural habitats. But Mia knew Shadow had not fled because he was wild. He had run because some wounds do not merely reside beneath the skin, they inhabit the very bones. Then came the unforeseen development. 2 days later, a break-in was reported at the Jensen farm. The old barn had been forcibly entered in the dead of night. Tools and copper wiring were purloined, but the thief did not get far. He was discovered the next morning on the orchard trail, bleeding, disoriented, and incoherently rambling about eyes in the darkness and a massive dog that appeared from nowhere. His arm bore bite marks, deep ones. Initially, people were skeptical, but then they observed the paw prints. Large, deep, unmistakable, leading from the barn down the trail and disappearing into the trees. Mia said nothing. She did not need to. The town resumed its whispering, differently this time. A phantom dog, a guardian, a shadow watching over the valley. And just like that, the narrative shifted. Emerson Valley had weathered tempests before, but none comparable to this. Not the kind that left trees contorted and barns demolished. This was the sort that simmered beneath people's skin, where fear mingled with guilt and shame hung oppressively in the air. The break-in at the Jensen barn became the sole topic of conversation, not due to what was stolen, but because of its conclusion. A man, clawed and bloodied, babbling about a black shadow with luminous eyes that materialized from nowhere. It was not merely peculiar. It was unsettling. Some dismissed it as a fabrication. Others swore to its authenticity. And when Mia quietly uttered Shadow's name, the discussions grew more subdued and 10 times more charged. Mia, meanwhile, continued to revisit the orchard shed each evening, her flashlight beams scanning the treelines, her heart pounding with a hope that refused to wane. She left food, fresh water, and a blanket. Every morning the food was gone. But Shadow did not reveal himself, not yet. It was as if he had transformed into something else entirely, observing from just beyond reach, no longer trusting the world that had attempted to obliterate him. Then came the second break-in. Another farm, the same tale. Stolen tools, a trail of blood, and a man too traumatized to describe his assailant. Only wide, terrified eyes and a single phrase, "It wasn't normal." Now, in any other town, this would incite panic. Lock your doors, arm yourselves, begin hunting for what does not belong. But this was Emerson Valley, and something unexpected transpired. A woman named Mrs. Farnell, a widow in her 70s who lived alone by the river, came forward with a different kind of account. 2 nights prior, she had slipped on her icy porch and was unable to rise. With no phone and no neighbors nearby, she lay there for hours, shivering, her strength ebbing, until she felt warm breath and a heavy body press against her side. A dog, large, quiet, calm, stayed with her the entire night, curled beside her like a silent protector. By morning, when her son found her, the dog had vanished, leaving behind only paw prints and a piece of Mia's old red scarf, knotted gently around its leg. The town was no longer on edge. It was intrigued. Earl, conversely, had not spoken to anyone in days. He observed the looks, heard the murmurs, and every time the subject arose, he would retreat further into his bastion of solitude. But something was shifting within him too. Each night, he left scraps of meat at the edge of his property. Each morning they were gone. He did not articulate it, but he knew the dog was alive and, somehow, watching him. One evening, as the wind moaned low through the valley, Mia stood at the orchard's edge, the moon luminous above her. She whispered into the darkness, not anticipating a response. "Wherever you are, thank you." She turned to leave, then paused. Eyes in the undergrowth glowed gold for a mere second. Shadow emerged, slow and limping, his silhouette larger than she recalled, scarred, weary, but standing, alive. She did not move. Neither did he. For a full minute, they simply regarded each other. And then he did something that dispelled the last of her fear. He wagged his tail once, just once, and melted back into the trees. Shadow was not merely a survivor now. He was something else, something that did not belong to one individual or even one family. He had become a myth, a presence, a protector. And the town, for the first time in a long while, began to look inward. What had they permitted to occur? What else had they averted their gaze from? And what would they do now that the dog they had forsaken was quietly saving them? The wind that night was abnormal. It howled as if for warning of something unseen. The orchard trees bent under its force, and dry branches snapped like femurs. Mia felt it in her core, a knot of disquiet she could not identify. She was upstairs assisting Ben with a school project on constellations when the lights flickered. Then came the odor, acrid, bitter smoke. Outside, the sky throbbed with an orange glow. The fire ignited at the far end of the orchard. No one knew its origin. Some attributed it to a lightning strike, others to the old transformer pole. But within minutes, the flames ravaged the trees as if driven by a personal vendetta. The wind whipped sparks into fireballs, and the desiccated winter would offer no resistance. Mia's father grabbed the hose. Her mother telephoned the fire station, but nothing was progressing swiftly enough. It was pandemonium, blinding, deafening. And then, amidst it all, a scream pierced through everything. Ben was not inside. No one had seen him depart, but a neighbor later recounted seeing him running toward the barn, pursuing their dog's chew toy he had dropped earlier that day. That barn, the one at the orchard's periphery, was now a glowing silhouette behind a curtain of flame. Mia's father ran after him, but a sheet of fire obstructed the path. A beam collapsed. Another crack resonated through the smoke. For a second, it seemed hopeless, the kind of moment one replays endlessly in their mind, lamenting what should have been done if only one had moved faster, shouted louder, prayed more fervently. And then something stirred in the fire. Not a person, not a firefighter, a dog. Shadow materialized from the smoke like something conjured by grief itself. Limping, burned, but focused, his body low to the ground, muscles tensed in pain, eyes fixed on the barn. Mia's mother gasped, her father stood immobilized. And without hesitation, Shadow vanished into the inferno. Seconds dragged by. Flames snapped. Each second was a silent scream within Mia's chest. Then movement again. Shadow reappeared, dragging something. Ben. The boy's shirt was singed, his eyes wide with terror, but he was alive, coughing, crying. Shadow gripped his collar like a lifeline, dragging him inch by inch until he collapsed beside Mia's family in the dirt. The fire danced behind them like a closing curtain. And right there, before a dozen stunned neighbors and 2 arriving fire trucks, Shadow collapsed, flat on his side, legs twitching, smoke curling from his coat. He did not move. And in that instant, time did not just halt, it shattered. Someone captured it all on a phone. The video became a viral sensation in less than a day. Stray dog rescues boy from fire. The headline was ubiquitous. And yet, what the clip failed to show was what transpired afterward. Mia curled around Shadow as if he were the most precious thing on earth, her dad sobbing as he held Ben in his arms, and the expression on Earl Whitaker's face as he stood at the edge of the road, witnessing it all unfold. He did not speak, he did not move. But something within him broke, not a crack, a fracture, and the guilt that had been festering in his chest for years finally streamed from his eyes. That night was not merely the culmination of a storm, it was the moment a town exhausted its excuses. It was the moment everyone had to ask, what do we owe the ones we fail? And are second chances genuine if we delay too long in offering them? The fire had left more than just smoke lingering in the air, it left something unsaid, something weighty. And while the town buzzed with acclaim for the enigmatic phantom dog who saved Ben Jensen, one man remained silent. Earl Whitaker had not ventured off his porch in days, not since the fire, not since he stood at the periphery of the orchard road and observed that the dog, drag a small boy from the brink of death. His neighbors still passed judgment in hushed tones. Some labeled him cruel, others pitied him, but none comprehended what truly sat upon his chest like a stone too heavy to displace, until the day he walked into the sheriff's office. He did not knock, did not wait, simply opened the door, stared down the deputy, who nearly spilled his coffee, and uttered the words as if compelling them past a lifetime of corrosion. I need to talk about the dog. Sheriff Wilcox, a man who had known Earl since he was a youth with more brawn than breeding, said nothing, merely gestured for him to sit. Earl did not. "I didn't shoot that dog," he commenced, then corrected himself. "No, I did. But I didn't see him. I saw something else." The room was utterly silent, save for the tick of the wall clock slicing through years of anguish. "My son," Earl said. "You remember Jacob? When the accident happened, when he was hit, they said it was quick. Said he didn't feel a thing. But they didn't talk about what was in the back seat." Sheriff Wilcox leaned forward slowly. "There was a dog," Earl continued, "a German Shepherd, Jacobs. Survived the crash. They said it ran off when the paramedics came." His voice fractured now. "I looked for that dog for months, plastered the valley with flyers, called shelters. I needed something of my boy to hold onto. But it never showed. Not once." He swallowed with difficulty, his eyes becoming moist. "So that morning when I saw him by the fence, thin, dirty, limping, I didn't see a stray. I saw what I lost. And my mind twisted it, made it wrong. I don't know what I thought. Maybe it was spite. Maybe it was punishment. I saw guilt in that dog's face. And I pulled the trigger like I was erasing the pain." For a moment, he could not speak. Just clenched his fists and stared at the wall. "I didn't shoot a dog," he said, his voice raw. "Now I shot my grief. And it didn't die." Mia heard it all. She had come to the office that day to return Ben's lost backpack. She had not anticipated Earl's presence, had not intended to eavesdrop. But when the sheriff noticed her near the door and Earl turned to see her standing there, backpack in hand and eyes wide with an emotion somewhere between fury and forgiveness, no one uttered a word. Mia stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, and placed something on the desk between them. It was a photograph, a printout from the viral video still, Shadow lying in the dirt, his chest rising faintly, Ben curled up beside him, arms wrapped around the dog's neck as if it were the safest haven in the world. Earl stared at the image, long and quietly, and then, for the first time in years, the man who had not wept at his own son's funeral finally allowed the tears to flow. "Tell me what he needs," Earl whispered. "I'll give it. All of it." Sometimes atonement does not arrive with applause, sometimes it commences with a man confronting a pain he buried too profoundly and a girl courageous enough to grant him the space to experience it. Shadow's convalescence was never destined to be straightforward. The burns along his ribs were severe, the muscle in his hind leg had atrophied from both injury and malnourishment. And yet he persevered, fighting, breathing, refusing to capitulate. The town had altered its perception of him, but Shadow was not concerned with glory, he merely desired peace. And for the first time in what seemed like eons, peace did not feel unattainable. He spent the initial few nights at Dr. Selma's home clinic, curled on a soft pallet of old blankets beside a heater that hummed like a slumbering dragon. Mia visited daily. She brought books. Her brother Ben brought drawings, crayon sketches of him and Shadow, side by side, grinning like lifelong companions who had always known each other. They left them taped to the walls of the room. But the moment that shifted everything arrived unassumingly. It was Earl. He came not with vociferous apologies, but with something superior, action. He brought fresh cuts of meat, donated a new set of fencing for the Jensen's damaged barn. But more significantly, he came and simply sat. He did not attempt to pet Shadow, did not even speak at first. He would bring a chair, sit in the corner of the room, and listen to Mia read. The first few times, Shadow did not even open his eyes. But then, one afternoon, something occurred. Mia had brought Shadow a new collar, handcrafted from an old belt and stitched with the word Guardian. She placed it gently beside him. But before she could stand, Shadow extended his paw and tapped the collar once. It was a small gesture, easily overlooked, but Earl witnessed it and Earl broke. He knelt down, his body trembling, and whispered, "I never knew how to say sorry. I still don't. But if you need a place, if you'll have me, it's yours." Shadow opened his eyes slowly, then pressed his head gently, cautiously, into Earl's shaking hand. Forgiveness does not arrive like thunder, it materializes in quiet moments, like sunlight through dusty panes. The town, once divided, began to mend as well. The grocery store initiated a fundraiser for a proper animal rescue. Children held a bake sale to cover Shadow's medical expenses, though most people simply contributed money to see him walk again. Even the sheriff, who seldom smiled at anything, stopped by the clinic with dog biscuits and an envelope full of donations from an anonymous benefactor. No one questioned, but everyone knew. And then came the moment everyone had been anticipating. Spring arrived like a diffident guest, slowly dispelling the frost. On the first warm Saturday, the town congregated at the Jensen property. Earl had offered his land for something new, something enduring, Shadow's haven, a wooden shelter with capacity for 10 rescued dogs. It was modest, but it was perfect. And standing beneath the freshly cut sign was Shadow himself, walking, still limping, but standing proud. He wore his guardian collar. His fur was regrowing. His eyes, once dim, now sparkled with quiet wisdom. Children lined up to pet him. Adults watched from a distance, humbled by the story they had once disregarded. And Earl, he stood by the door with a clipboard and a tentative smile. He was no longer just a farmer, he was a caretaker, a man redeemed not by words but by undertaking the arduous work of being present. Sometimes healing does not commence in hospitals or churches, sometimes it begins with a girl who refused to look away, a dog who declined to quit, and a man courageous enough to concede he had been wrong. By the time spring had definitively claimed the valley, melting away the brittle frost that clung to fence posts and forgotten nooks, something else had thawed as well, something more profound. The inhabitants of Emerson Valley were quieter now, not from apprehension or judgment, but from reflection. The tale of the German shepherd, once shot and abandoned, had interwoven itself into the town's very fabric. No longer mere gossip, not solely redemption, it had become memory. And memory possesses a way of softening a place's harsh contours. Shadow did not return to the woods. He remained, not in any particular home, but precisely where he seemed to belong, on the porch of the new shelter Earl had helped construct, observing the world pass by with those serene, weathered eyes. He would greet every visitor with a slow tail wag and then resume his quiet station like a sentinel at ease. He did not bark. He did not chase. He simply watched. And everyone who came remarked similarly, it felt like he understood me. The shelter, Shadow's haven, swiftly evolved into more than a structure. It became a symbol, a place where old regrets and second chances coexisted within the same walls. Stray dogs, abandoned pets, even a few feral cats found their way there over the ensuing months. And Shadow, like a seasoned commander, maintained a quiet vigil over every new arrival. But it was not merely animals that transformed. Earl became a different sort of man, not in a dramatic cinematic fashion. He still wore the same boots, still maintained more solitude than most, but now his hands constructed things instead of breaking them. He planted flowers along the shelter path. He read books Mia recommended. He even spoke at a school assembly, nervously, awkwardly, about grief, mistakes, and how a single act need not define an entire life. And Mia, she became somewhat of a legend herself, the girl who saved the dog that saved the town. She translated her story into words, genuinely beautiful words. Her short story, The Dog Who Watched the World, won a statewide competition. She read it aloud at the county library before more people than she had ever envisioned. And when she reached the part about the fire, the boy, the smoke, and the dog dragging him from it all, not a single adult in that room remained dry-eyed. Ben, naturally, illustrated every page of the book and Shadow featured in every drawing. One snowy morning, nearly a year to the day after the shot resonated across the cold ground, the town assembled for an unexpected declaration. No flyers, no loud promotion, just word of mouth and something that felt sacred. They were naming the road leading to the shelter. The sign was simple, hand-carved, Shadow Way. There were no speeches that day, just a gathering of neighbors bundled in scarves and coats, standing motionless under a gray sky as the first flakes of winter drifted down. Shadow sat beside the sign, his body older, his fur tinged with gray around the muzzle. But his eyes, those deep, steady eyes, had not aged a bit. He did not react when the cloth was removed from the sign. He just looked up once at Mia, then laid his head between his paws and closed his eyes. Silence settled over the crowd, not awkward, not forced, just genuine. A kind of silence that conveys everything. Because sometimes the most resonant stories conclude not in applause, but in a breath, a memory, a name inscribed in snow. And when people inquire about Shadow, where he came from, what he did, the answer invariably comes the same way, with a pause, a smile, and a glance toward the trees. Because some heroes do not require a leash. Just a second chance.